The proposed pay-to-park system has some people in Neptune Beach pretty upset.
A parking company made their presentation to manage city parking lots, but it has left some people with more questions than answers. On your side's Troy Kless is in Neptune Beach with more details for us tonight.
Parking in a spot like this could cost a Neptune Beach visitor $2.50 an hour or $35 a day if this proposal goes through. Now, some residents of this area say that they are not too happy with it.
A family of 5 or 6, they come down, they have to pay $35 more just to park for the day. I think that's an inconsideration.
JT Leachman, living along 1st and Bay Street, saying there is no parking problem in his neighborhood. Signs show where and when you can or can't park, which a parking company wants to change. Elite Management Services made their proposal at City Council last week, which left Councilmember Josh Messenger scratching his head.
I just think it fundamentally was flawed. I believe the quality of life would have been impacted negatively with the plan as presented. So I wasn't happy with that.
The plan did not specify which parking spots would be covered, only that it would cover areas between Florida and Atlantic Boulevard, along 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Streets. Streets that Leachman feels need to be safe for visitors and residents.
You see bicyclists and skateboarders and baby carriages, and this is a very slow time. And if there's zooming in and out between cars, I think it's an accident waiting to happen.
Here at City Hall is where a public meeting will be held on Wednesday to discuss this pay-to-park system. Down south in Jacks Beach, they have their own pay-to-park system that's going to be implemented starting mid-March. We have information on that in this story on firstcoastnews.com. In Neptune Beach, Troy Kless, First Coast News, on your side.